The next unit in the slope outcome is angle of elevation. So what I want you to do is do the warm-up. If you remember this from grade 10 or workplace 10, you should be able to calculate using the tan button. So locate the tan button on your calculator and find the expressions in the warm-up and come back and check them. All right, so there they are. Remember that when you are using the tan to the -1 or sine to the -1 or cos to the -1 button, you're finding an angle. And when you are using the regular trig function, you're finding a side length, okay? So now that you are getting the cobwebs out of that, and the reason I had to do that is because we're going to be using the tan in order to talk about angle of elevation, okay? So the angle of elevation is the angle between the horizontal and the line of sight, okay? So the angle between the horizontal and the line of sight when you're looking up. The greater the angle of elevation, the steeper the line, okay? So here's my horizontal, and when I'm looking up at something, I create an angle of elevation, okay? So the steeper the line, well then, this is also related to slope, okay? And if you're familiar with, or if you remember trig ratios, we could basically do this, create a right angle triangle, and that's why we're dealing in the tangent ratio, because my rise would be the opposite side, my run would be the adjacent side, opposite and adjacent is tangent. But if you don't remember that, don't panic, because we have formulas here. Basically, you have these formulas and you will get them. If I want to calculate the angle of elevation, I'm going to take the inverse tan of my rise and my run, and the tan of the angle of elevation is rise over run. Okay, so let us go down. It says Bev is flying a kite. The kite is 91 feet up in the air. Okay, so 91 feet up in the air at a distance of 250 feet away from Bev. What is the angle of elevation of the kite? So basically you have a kite over here. Here's Bev. The angle of elevation is here looking up, right? So it is 91 feet up in the air and it's 250 feet away from her. So I have my rise and my run. So my angle of elevation, we're going to use theta for that because that's what we use to represent angle, is the tan inverse of my rise of 91 over my run of 250. So you punch that into your calculator and you should get 20 degrees. Remember that you have to use these brackets around here. You need to bracket that fraction, okay? So make sure that your calculator can give you that answer, and when you can, move on to the next question. The last question here says, if a guy wire to a telephone pole has an angle of elevation of 30 degrees from a point that is 50 feet from the base of the pole, so I've got 30 degrees from a point that is 50 feet from the base of the pole, how high up the pole does it reach? So here's my pole, okay, and I'm 50 feet away, looking up at the pole at an angle of elevation of 30 degrees, and it wants to know how high up the pole does that reach. Okay, so basically I wanted to calculate my rise. So I know that the tan of the angle of elevation is equal to my rise over my run. So when I want to solve for that, I'm going to multiply by 50 on both sides. So I end up with 50 times tan of 30, which is 28.9 feet. Now, just a reminder that if you do remember the trig ratios and you remember that tan is opposite over adjacent and you want to use that formula instead of the rise and the run, please feel free. It means the same thing. This is just taken in the context of the slope outcome, but it is by no means wrong if you use opposite and adjacent and use the tangent ratio. Alrighty, so you go ahead and practice the questions now.